Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, unpack them, and give you the knowledge you need. Today, we've got a really interesting set. We're looking at materials that give us a clear window into conservative priorities right now.
Yeah, that's right.
From state-level plans all the way up to national economic debates and, who's funding what.
Exactly. We've got state legislative stuff, economic analysis, campaign finance deep dives.
So the goal?
Well, our mission is really to get under the hood. Understand the stated goals, sure, but also the policies, the debates, maybe some tensions within the conservative movement.
Connecting the dots, essentially. How these ideas become action.
Precisely. Helping you see how it all links together.
Okay, let's get into it then. Where should we start with this landscape?
I think starting at the state level makes sense. We have this 2025 legislative blueprint from the Alabama Republican Party. It's pretty direct.
Right. And it lays out not just policies, but a whole philosophy, doesn't it?
It really does. It's explicitly grounded in conservative values. The stated goal is, and I'm quoting here, to preserve our state's values and way of life.
And how do they propose doing that? What's the approach?
Well, what's striking is how they use state power on, both social and economic issues, protecting families, children, that's big,
right,
but also deregulation, individual liberty.
And they point to things they've already done.
Oh, yeah. They mention shielding kids from sexually explicit materials, cutting the grocery tax, that's an economic relief thing, and empowering parents with school choice and curriculum transparency.
Okay.
Plus defending the Second Amendment, free speech, banning vaccine passports permanently. It's a broad sweep.
Got it. So looking ahead to 2025, what are the big priorities outlined in this Alabama plan?
Economic opportunity is definitely up there. They want to ease financial burdens, particularly on middle-class and low-income families.
What are the specifics?
The main tools are reducing taxes and unnecessary regulations. Specifically, they talk about getting rid of Alabama's business personal property tax, setting up free market rules for cryptocurrency, and starting to lower the state income tax. So definitely less government on the economic side.
Less intervention, yeah. But you said it's intertwined with social policy.
Tightly, yeah. Another huge area is protecting children and preserving parental rights.
Okay, what does that entail?
The core belief here is that parents, not the government, should be guiding kids' education, especially on sensitive stuff, shielding them from what they call radical political ideologies and inappropriate materials.
This specific proposals?
Yes. Things like banning transgender indoctrination in public schools, ensuring girls have private spaces, bathrooms, locker rooms,
right,
giving parents total control over opting kids into or out of sex education, and preventing teachers from being forced to use certain gender pronouns.
Okay, pretty clear lines being drawn there. What else is on the agenda?
Well, there's securing the border and keeping Alabama safe. They link this directly to the consequences of the Biden administration's open border policies.
Even though border security is mostly federal, right?
They acknowledge that, yeah. But they propose state actions like identifying and deporting criminal illegal immigrants, cracking down on human trafficking, and guaranteeing funding for district attorney offices.
Interesting. So state-level actions on a federal issue. What about individual liberties?
That's another pillar. Safeguarding personal freedoms from increasing government overreach.
Like what?
One proposal is Right to Try 2.0. This basically lets patients with life-threatening conditions access experimental treatments faster, treatments not fully FDA approved yet.
Okay.
Also, banning red flag laws, they see those as a threat to Second Amendment rights. Prohibiting restrictions on using cash. And recognizing religious liberty, defending personal conviction.
And elections, that's often a focus.
Definitely. Ensuring election integrity. The stated goal is restoring trust through transparency and common sense reforms.
Okay.
They propose a hand count post-election audit, reforming absentee voting, and implementing party registration for primary elections.
All right. Anything else major in this state plan?
Yeah, two more areas. Strengthening families, which they call the cornerstone of a strong, stable, and prosperous society.
Okay. Proposes there.
Raising the age of medical consent, passing something called the DHR Transparency and Integrity Act. That's about accountability in the Department of Human Resources. And giving pregnancy resource centers tax credit status.
Got it. And the last one?
Opposing radical leftist policies, basically resisting what they term extreme ideologies.
And how does that translate into policy?
Defining womanhood in state law, protecting women's private spaces, preventing banks from debanking people closing accounts because of religious or political beliefs.
Right, I've heard about that.
Banning taxpayer funds for DEI programs, and interestingly, recognizing gold and silver as legal currency.
Wow. Okay, that Alabama blueprint is pretty comprehensive. It really lays out a specific vision.
It does. It covers a lot of ground.
So the big question then is, how does this kind of thinking, these priorities, how do they scale up? Especially when you look at something massive, like this big, beautiful bill mentioned in our sources, often linked to Trump.
That's the million-dollar question, or maybe trillion-dollar question here.
Yeah, maybe. How did these conservative principles, especially the idea of fiscal prudence, stack up against a bill of that size?
It gets complicated fast. This mega bill, heavily tied to former President Trump, it's basically designed to push through a lot of his domestic priorities.
Like the tax cuts.
Exactly. It's a prime example of applying that principle federally. Now, according to the CBO, that's the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, this bill cuts taxes by around $4.5 trillion.
$4.5 trillion. Okay.
But it also increases spending by about $300 billion, mostly military, immigration enforcement, smaller things. And it cuts spending on programs like Medicaid, food assistance by $1.4 trillion.
So tax cuts far outweighing spending cuts. What's the bottom line on the debt?
The CBO projects it adds about $3.4 trillion to the national debt over 10 years. And remember, the debt's already over $36 trillion.
Yikes. That is a staggering number. And it must create some friction within the Republican Party itself, right?
Yeah.
The traditional fiscal conservatives versus this approach.
Absolutely. You really saw that tension bubble up. We have a quote here from Bill Hoagland. He worked for the Senate Budget Committee, Republican staff, for like 25 years.
Okay, what did he say?
He said, Republicans in the past have talked about debt and deficits, but I don't get the sense that they have the same concerns today. It's not the Republican Party that I remember.
That's pretty telling. Is it a fundamental shift then? Or just a different calculation?
It seems like maybe a bit of both. Some conservative economists use these analogies, like a family maxing out credit cards on vacation and leaving the kids with the bill to express that concern.
Right.
And you do see Republican holdouts, like Representative Russ Fulcher identifies as a fiscal conservative. He said he was certainly not excited that the Senate version cost more than the House one. And Representative Dan Newhouse raised concerns about the Medicaid part for his constituents. Pointed out about a quarter of people in his state, Washington, are on Medicaid. So, real-world impacts.
But there are defenders, too, right? How do they justify the deficit impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Representative Michael Baumgartner acknowledged, it adds to the deficit on paper, but he called it a really great piece of legislation that grows our economy, secures the border, and makes America safer.
So the argument is growth will offset it.
That's the core idea for many proponents. Representative Mike Simpson even called the CBO estimate a phony number, basically saying economic growth is the real solution here, not just the static score.
So a clear split in how they view these numbers, even within the party.
Definitely. Kyle Pomerleau from the American Enterprise Institute, that's a conservative think tank, he kind of summed it up. He noted the bill is cutting taxes by much more than it is cutting spending, so the net effect is going to be an increase in borrowing. Pretty straightforward math.
And this tension, it extends beyond just the overall budget numbers, right? What about big social programs like Social Security, Medicare?
Huge area of debate. Our sources talk about past proposals like Senator Rick Scott's 2022 plan. He suggested sunsetting major programs like Social Security and Medicare every 5 years.
Sunsetting, meaning they'd expire unless Congress reauthorized them.
Exactly, which could lead to drastic cuts or, raising eligibility ages. That idea has been around a while, popular with libertarian think tanks like Cato.
But politically risky, I imagine.
Hugely. Scott faced immediate backlash. Relentless criticism, the sources say. Not just from Democrats, but from Republicans too, including Donald Trump. So Scott backpedaled pretty quickly.
Interesting. So Trump positioned himself as the defender of these programs.
Yeah, opportunistically, you could say.
No.
He attacked rivals like Ron DeSantis for past votes on raising the Medicare eligibility age.
Even though Trump himself has pushed for cuts elsewhere.
Right, like advocating for big cuts to food stamps, adding work requirements for Medicaid. It's a complex political dance.
Shows the power of public opinion, I guess.
No doubt. Nearly 7 out of 10 Republican voters tell pollsters, don't cut Social Security. So challenging that is politically fraught.
It really is a tightrope walk. balancing ideology, debt concerns, and voter sentiment on these really popular programs.
It's a constant dynamic, especially with ongoing debates about the national debt and, where any potential cuts should or shouldn't happen.
Okay, so we have these policy pushes, these internal debates. Let's shift gears slightly. What about the influence game? Who's pushing for these policies? Who's funding the efforts? Money always talks, right?
It certainly seems to play a big role. Our sources show deep connections between corporate financial interests and these policy pushes, especially defending those 2017 Trump tax cuts.
How does that work? Is it just donations?
It's more than that. It's direct lobbying, strategic campaigns using connections. Take Advancing American Freedom, or AAF. Founded by former VP Mike Pence.
Okay.
They launched a $10 million campaign specifically aimed at keeping Trump's tax cuts permanent.
And who's involved with AAF?
Well, look at their board. It's heavily populated with corporate lobbyists, lawyers, executives, people with direct financial stakes.
Like who? Give us some examples.
Okay. You've got Mark Short. He's AAF chairman. He was Pence's chief of staff, also Trump's director of legislative affairs, helped pass the 2017 tax cuts.
Right.
His current consulting firm advises Fortune 500s, private equity, hedge funds. Direct link. Then there's Ed Fulner, former head of the Heritage Foundation. Trump credited him as instrumental in the tax cuts, and Heritage is now leading this Project 2025, pushing for more big tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy.
So clear alignment there. Any others?
Oh, yeah. Jeff Knight, Chief Government Relations Officer for a huge banking company, Old National Bancorp. Greg Jacob, partner at a corporate law firm representing financial services. Josh Pitcock, VP of Government Affairs for Oracle. They've lobbied on corporate taxes.
So people whose day jobs involve navigating or influencing these very policies.
Exactly. And Art Polk, CEO of Variety Wholesalers, the Roses retail chain. He also chairs a foundation granting millions to right-wing anti-tax groups like AEI and Heritage. Victor Smith, lawyer and lobbyist. Clients include big names like United Health, Cigna. It's a tight network.
And what about other groups like Club for Growth? They're often mentioned in these contexts.
Definitely. They're a major player, an anti-tax group. Their foundation arm pushes for even deeper corporate tax cuts.
And their funding.
Our sources highlight key billionaire funders who've seen massive benefits from the Trump tax cuts, especially from that special break for pass-through entities.
Right. You mentioned those earlier. Explain that again.
Sure. Pass-throughs are businesses like LLCs, S-Corp. Profits pass through to the owner's personal income, avoiding corporate tax rates. The 2017 law gave them a big deduction.
So it lowered taxes significantly for owners of these businesses.
Hugely. For many. Like Richard Uihlein, he gave Club for Growth Action over $87 million. He personally saved an estimated $215 million from that pass-through break in 2018 alone.
Wow, $215 million.
Yeah. Diane Hendricks, another big donor, gave $4.5 million, saved $36 million from the same break in 2018. Her net worth reportedly jumped over 260% between late 2017 and late 2023, partly attributed to the tax cuts. Jeff Yass, another major donor.
So a direct financial incentive to keep those cuts in place or even expand them.
It certainly looks that way. And Club for Growth's president, David McIntosh, he argued back in 2017 that the tax cuts didn't go far enough. Wanted to kill the estate tax, repeal the alternative minimum tax entirely. He's still pushing to make the cuts permanent.
This seems to tie into campaign finance, too. The sources mention Ohio races.
Yeah, they illustrate these trends. Lots of money from super PACs, often funded by out-of-state mega donors. Wealthy candidates funding their own campaigns. Matt Dolan loaned his $10.2 million. Bernie Moreno, $4.5 million.
And dark money?
Yep. Groups that don't disclose their donors. Club for Growth Action, for example, got 86% of its money from donations of $1 million plus. Top donors, Jeffrey Yass, Richard Uihlein, who's noted as a major backer of election denial and other conservative causes.
So a concentration of big money shaping the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Are there broader lobbying efforts beyond just tax cuts?
Absolutely. The National Association of Manufacturers, NAM, they're pushing for this reconciliation bill, warning of devastating economic consequences if it fails. They're focused on manufacturing and energy incentives.
Okay.
The American Petroleum Institute, API, lobbying for a permanent bonus depreciation, deductions for drilling costs, even pushing for an IRA hydrogen production incentive.
So specific industries looking for specific benefits.
Right. Battery groups, Ford Motor Co., lobbying for IRA tax credits for domestic battery manufacturing. It's complex. Even Elon Musk got involved.
Oh, yeah. What was his take?
He criticized the mega bill for gutting some Biden-era climate incentives that actually benefited Tesla while keeping oil and gas perks and adding a new EV registration fee.
Interesting twist.
Yeah. House Speaker Mike Johnson suggested Musk's opposition might be tied to the bill repealing an EPA emissions rule for cars, the so-called EV mandate, though Musk says he opposes all subsidies. So lots of competing interests.
And this influence, it goes beyond just lobbying Congress.
It seems so. Sources mention the head of the Skadden Foundation resigning. Why? Because the law firm committed $100 million in pro bono work to causes favored by the Trump administration, including a requirement that new fellows represent diverse political views, including conservative ones.
Shaping institutions.
And even shaping culture. Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society gifted $1.6 billion to a Texas studio, Wonder Project, specifically to make conservative Christian content, aiming for broader cultural influence.
Okay, so policy debates, fiscal tensions, powerful lobbying, cultural influence. Let's bring it back to the ground level. How is all this playing out in the current economy? What are people actually feeling, and what's the narrative around it?
Well, the economy is definitely front and center in the public discourse, according to our sources. And there's a lot of talk attributing problems to government policies, particularly tariffs and spending.
What's the specific data showing?
The U.S. GDP actually contracted by 0.5% in the first quarter of 2025. That was the first contraction since 2022.
Okay, so that fuels recession talk.
Exactly. Lots of discussion about whether the U.S. is already in a recession. Some sources we looked at predict it continuing, maybe getting worse in Q2, even talking about a potential economic meltdown in the next year.
And what policies are getting blamed?
Tariffs and bad trade policies come up a lot. One source, economistology Gene, puts it plainly. Government interference in trade raises costs, it disrupts businesses, it hits your wallet.
Right.
The Economist magazine even suggested Trump's tariffs cause a global recession. And consumer spending dropped in May, the biggest dip since the start of the year. Sources link that to elevated uncertainty around Trump's economic policies weighing on growth.
So uncertainty is a key factor. What about inflation? That's always a big public concern.
Huge. The high price of everything right now, as people put it, and the frustration that prices don't seem to just go back down.
People notice that.
And it's important, to distinguish. Inflation slowing just means prices are rising less quickly. It's not deflation, where prices actually fall, which economists generally see as bad too. But people feel the high price levels.
Which naturally leads to the blame game, right? Who's pointing fingers where?
Oh, absolutely. Sources show Trump blaming Biden for economic problems naturally. Critics of Biden point to the skyrocket cost of everything since he took office.
What do they blame it on?
Reckless spending. They name things like the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. They argue inflation keeps going up despite the name of that last one, basically calling Biden's presidency a failed experiment in leftism.
And the counter-argument. Who do Biden supporters or Trump critics blame?
They often point back to Trump's policies, especially the tariffs. One source, a Now This Impact video, had this statistic or claim, rather, that if a recession happens, it'd be the 11th out of the last 12 to start under a Republican president. And there's also that critique of the tax cuts themselves, the argument that tax cuts for the wealthy only benefit the rich. Sources mention research debunking trickle-down economics. That directly pushes back on the Republican argument that their tax cuts create broad benefits.
So competing narratives trying to explain the economic situation people are experiencing.
Very much so. Each side uses the data and policies to fit their frame.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. From the detailed state-level conservative vision in Alabama.
Right, laying out social and economic goals side by side.
To the massive national mega bill and the really interesting internal debates about its fiscal impact.
Yeah, that tension between deficit hawks and the tax cut growth proponents.
And then peeling back the curtain on the powerful financial interests, the lobbying, the campaign finance networks working behind the scenes.
It's clear these policies aren't just ideas. They have significant financial and organizational muscle behind them.
It really paints a picture of modern conservatism in action. The social priorities, the economic theories, the leveraging of state power, all mixed together.
It really does. And it highlights that dynamic tension we talked about. Traditional fiscal concerns versus big tax cuts, strong social stances, and how that all interacts with, the economic realities you face every day. It's not monolithic.
No, definitely not. This deep dive has given us, and hopefully you, a lot to process. It really leaves us with a central question, doesn't it?
What's that?
How will these clearly stated conservative priorities, the ones we saw in the Alabama plan, the ones driving the mega bill, how will they ultimately balance against the hard realities of the national debt, against shifting public opinion, especially on those big safety net programs, and against those incredibly powerful forces of lobbying and influence we just discussed?
That's the key question going forward, absolutely. How does the ideology meet the road, meet the budget, meet the voters?
It's definitely a space we all need to keep watching closely. The way ideology, economics, and power interact, well, that's shaping the future right now.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. There's always more to unpack, more perspectives to understand as these things continue to unfold.